Hello, my cell phone is here to redeem itself for ringing up earlier and help me introduce our main speaker. Dr. Ralph Schoolcraft III is a Californian raised in an atheist family who ended up in Texas. After getting scholarly degrees from Berkeley, Johns Hopkins, Emory, and the Sorbonne in France, he became an associate professor of French at the International Studies Department at Texas A&M University, where he hoped to make a difference. And he has made a difference in the lives of his students because he doesn't just teach French language and culture, but also teaches his students to be skeptical and to apply critical thinking. With a Distinguished Teaching Award and 46 publications, many of them in French, Ralph is known to his students as a professor who cares about them, who creates exchange programs and scholarships to inspire and enrich their intellectual experience. He likes the comfort of a good book, and he also makes a terrific Hawaiian salad. He's here today to talk about the French magazine Charlie Hebdo and why its vision of journalism and activism was attacked. Please give a welcome to Ralph Schoolcraft.
It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. I'd like to thank Natalie for the invitation, and that I think is, if you want to know everything that I think positively about Natalie, I think that introduction, it's very rare that you have an introduction where somebody presents you as you would actually like to be seen by people, and the things that you do try to accomplish, and that was a very touching, and that did certainly, I don't know if I managed to do all of those things, but I certainly strive to do those things. So thank you very much for the very kind introduction. Trying to follow Ronnie Cox will probably not be very easy. I realize that we may have had some questions about the last song, but on the other hand, Grady, if he's only going to know one song, I think Woody Guthrie is a pretty good place to start with that. So I think that evens things out fairly well. So I would like to. I'm afraid that I don't know how visible this will be to everybody, but we will see. So what I'm going to try to do is just give you some background so that we can open it up into a discussion from there. But I think one of the things that was the most frustrating to me about this whole event was I feel like the media largely failed to really give a very balanced and informed idea of what this newspaper was really about. And so I'm going to try to give a little bit of that, and then we'll go from there. So Charlie Hebdo is a magazine that probably could not exist in the United States. The front cover is always a cartoon. The back cover is always cartoons. But inside, you have editorials on all kinds of different issues, human rights issues, immigration questions, animal rights, the sins of deregulated capitalism. This is also an intellectual journal. This is not just a collection of scabrous cartoons to provoke people. And so all of their content is always understood as an ensemble. The cartoons are understood to be in dialogue with the other more analytical articles that you have inside the magazine itself. So simply taking the cartoons out of context really didn't give justice to what the magazine is about. They understand all of these things as a commentary between different people working for them. So it's a weekly magazine. The name partly comes from Charlie Brown, and partly because Charles de Gaulle, the president, when the magazine started, was one of their favorite targets. It was founded in 1960. It took on its current name in 1970. There was a 10-year gap where they went out of business, and they came back in 1992. And the one that I've been reading is basically, I started reading it in 1993 up to the present time, so that this is the span that I know best. Their origins really came out of 60s radicalism. 60s radicalism is a little bit different in France than it is than maybe we know from the Berkeley version of the 60s. For starters, it saw itself as really tied to political anarchism or philosophical anarchism. And I think there are a lot of misunderstandings about what anarchism is, but in the European context, what it really is a refusal of hierarchical relationships, and it understands society as a society of peers. That you build lateral relationships, that everybody is in a position at one time to lead and to follow, and so their utopian ideal is of a horizontal or a lateral society. So it's not this notion of anarchists just want chaos. This is not an accurate version. So they really came out of this background. They were known for a pretty ferocious critique of government, of the church, of the army. They would go after big business. They would go after finance. They certainly did not spare the United States and Russia and China. So basically, every representative of power was fair game for them. They also had, certainly the sexual revolution of the 60s was present in a few of their writers in particular specialized in this area, to such an extent that my copies of Charlie Hebdo, after the first 2 weeks of coming to the United States, they started arriving in a plastic, a gray plastic baggie that the post office was very conveniently putting my magazine each week so that the mailman felt like he was delivering pornography to me on a weekly basis. So that was a very nice way to make myself known in Texas when I first, the new professor has arrived. And certainly out of context, so their drawings can be fairly irreverent and shocking, especially I think to an American audience. One of the things that got lost in the discussions was that yes, Charlie Hebdo does make fun of the extremes of Islam. Yes, it does attack some of the extremes of Israeli politics and things like this. But certainly they have the main target has always been white dominant culture, white mainstream culture in France. They're very class conscious, so this is one of their kind of recurring characters in their drawings. PSG is the Paris soccer team, and he's got his 12-pack of beer. Then there's sort of the hipster character with his ponytail and his glasses and the carefully unshaven look. There is, of course, the presence of America's contribution to mass culture, but they also go after the wealthy. In a time of crisis, a gesture from the rich, with the middle finger up. And Tinius, who did this drawing here, the super wealthy bankers and the fascists always have their clouds of flies following them around in all of their pictures. So what brings us to our topic today is that a daily newspaper in Denmark published 12 caricatures of Muhammad, and so the issue of the prohibition of representing Mohammedan images was violated by the Danish newspaper. It created a lot of controversy. There were protests and threats, And in France, out of solidarity with these Danish journalists, a French daily newspaper reprinted those caricatures, and then Charlie Hebdo reprinted them as well. So in Denmark, this happened in 2005, and just a couple months later, in 2006, they were reprinted in France. When this became a fairly big issue and there were a lot of protests against Charlie Hebdo, one of their covers was, as you can see here, on the left it says, Mohammed overrun or overwhelmed by the fundamentalists. And it has Mohammed covering his eyes and crying. It's a really hard life being loved by morons. And this was, because they represented Muhammad, the image itself was already considered blasphemous and unacceptable. But there was also the question of, are they mocking Muhammad, or are they mocking a certain type of follower of Muhammad? And for them it was very clear that they were only mocking the fundamentalists, the extremists, that for them there was a willingness to accept different religious beliefs, but they were attacking the extremists. That obviously was not how it was perceived. After the Arab Spring began, there were lots of questions of what would the role be of various Islamic parties in Tunisia and Egypt and things like this. And when one of the Islamic parties won elections in Tunisia, Charlie Hebdo put out a new edition. It says Charlie Hebdo, but then underneath they've covered up the title, and it's called Sharia Hebdo. And now it's Mohammed who has become editor-in-chief of Charlie Hebdo. And the first rule that he's explaining is 100 lashes if you don't die laughing. So putting him on the cover again was considered another provocation. This did not take very long for a reaction. The main office of Charlie Hebdo was firebombed. The entire premises were destroyed. And here's the editor-in-chief standing in front of it. And this was despite round-the-clock police protection and things like this. But firebombed, burned to everything was burned, all of their archives, all of their material. So another daily newspaper took them in, and they continued to produce. And this leads up to the attack on January 7th, 4 years later, that many of you are probably aware of. 12 people were killed in this terrorist attack. The editor-in-chief, Sharb, was the specific target. They came in, it was two assailants with Kalashnikovs. They came in, they were seated, the editorial staff was meeting, doing their weekly meeting. Everybody was around the table. Ironically, the point of the meeting was Charlie Hebdo was supporting an anti-racism conference, and they were meeting to figure out how they were going to contribute to this. When the assailants came in, 12 people were killed. I would say 5 or 6 of France's leading editorial cartoonists were killed in this attack, but a number of other members of the in the office were killed as well. So Sharb, Cabu, who was in his 80s and still in his 80s, coming weekly to participate in all of these things. Honoré was in his 70s. Bernard Marie was known as Uncle Bernard. He was trained as an economist. He had ran for mayor of Paris. He wrote many of the analyses that were critical of capitalist politics, things like this. He was also killed in this attack. Tinius, who did the drawing with the flies around the wealthy banker, was also killed in this attack. As you can see, maybe you can see the coffins were all decorated with drawings from all of France's leading political cartoonists as a tribute. So you can see them here carrying his coffin out at the funeral. The two assailants were brothers from Algerian-born parents, but they were homegrown terrorists. They were French citizens and lived in the Paris region. And I'll come back to them in a moment. In 2011, when the firebombing happened, so the first attack on Charlie Hebdo, Jay Carney, who was at that time a spokesperson at the White House, responded and said, yes, we are aware that a French magazine published cartoons featuring a figure resembling the Prophet Muhammad, and obviously we have questions about the judgment of publishing something like this. We know that these images will be deeply offensive to many and have the potential to be inflammatory. But we've spoken repeatedly about the importance of upholding the freedom of expression that is enshrined in our Constitution. So the White House took a stance that shocked many in Europe on this occasion. It was especially considered shocking coming from the Obama White House, but also probably a certain logic given his attempts to try to maintain bridges with various Muslim countries. But clearly this was what I would call a step towards victim blaming. That in essence, we have questions about the judgment of publishing this. It opens the door to putting blame on the cartoonists for this attack upon them. After the assassinations this past year, the White House did not issue any criticism, but at the same time, they did not reiterate their defense of freedom of expression either. They condemned the attacks, but they did not attempt to characterize what Charlie Hebdo was or was not doing. So they sidestepped it on the second occasion. Many people in France accuse them of being opportunist. That is, they were doing these things solely to promote the magazine, that these were cheap laughs for their sales. Others attacked them, claimed that they were irresponsible because there were other lives that were lost. A policeman was assassinated on the street. Other members of the office unrelated to the magazine were killed on this occasion. It's true that Charlie Hebdo has a juvenile side to it that is a form of humor that is not everybody's cup of tea. This is the cover of one of the books from their former editor-in-chief. As you can see, there's a suicide bomber who's dropped his pants, and the bomb has been inserted into his rectum. And in the background, there's this fellow with the umbrella who's looking at this and says, "Careful, that's not going to come out in the wash," is his commentary on this act. What can we say about this that takes it out of the context of just kind of gratuitous, juvenile provocation? One of the things, certainly France has a very different relation to the body than we have in the United States. Among political cartoonists, they're very aware of France's Catholic tradition of the mortification of the body, the shame of the body. And so the political cartoonists who are hostile to this tradition tend to really kind of put the body in the viewer's face. They sort of continually remind the viewers of we all have a body, it's here, it smells, it's ugly sometimes, and that's that's what we are. This is what it is to be human. But there's also, I think, part of what they are doing is trying to convey just how radical and sort of insane this gesture is by inserting the bomb in the terrorist rectum. It makes you think of innards. It makes you think of the body and just how kind of cataclysmic the scene is for the people who arrive and attempt to assist the victims and things like this. So I think they're deliberately trying to make you uncomfortable with confronting you with the corporality of it. So to me, one can they're doing something more interesting than just having a cheap joke in a serious context. After the attack, Charlie Hebdo, even though over half of their staff had been assassinated, they were again hosted by another newspaper, and they did everything they could to put out a new edition of the magazine to make sure that it came out on time on the day that it was supposed to come out. One can imagine how difficult this was psychologically and even materially. They did what I think is a pretty extraordinary thing. Charlie Hebdo, it's subtitled Irresponsible Newspaper, but the title across the top is All is Forgiven. And a picture of Muhammad, and so again they refuse to back down on their right to represent Muhammad, but they have Muhammad holding the sign that was the rallying sign for all of those who were sympathetic to Charlie Hebdo. So Muhammad is holding the sign saying, "I am Charlie, we are all Charlie," and Muhammad is crying at what his followers have done. So I think this is already a pretty remarkable gesture, but the one thing that I literally did not hear a single commentator say is the background. The color green is the color of Islam. The color green is synonymous. You'll see it in nearly all of the flags. This was, they explained their attempt to say that Islam has its place in France, or the followers, Muslims have their place in France. They are part of the French community, and so they were understanding that this message is against the backdrop of Muslims trying to integrate into France. So these would be, I think, kind of a quick global and I'm afraid probably not entirely coherent presentation, but I wanted to at least sort of throw some things out there and then open it up to discussion, and that'll probably give me an opportunity to fill in some blanks. Yes?
I had heard about that, but I still don't understand who is saying what to whom. The irresponsible paper is apparently the little red,
Right.
and then whose line is that? And then
All is
forgiven is what Muhammad is saying.
No, it's Charlie Hebdo. It's Charlie Hebdo is
okay.
saying all is forgiven, and it's Muhammad who's saying I'm in solidarity with Charlie. The tag irresponsible newspaper is they believe that one of the that freedom of speech means that you are allowed to be a bad cartoonist. You are allowed to tell a joke that falls flat. You are allowed to rub people the wrong way. That's certainly not the aim, but this is covered in freedom of expression. And so this is why they're calling themselves irresponsible newspaper, because this is how they've been characterized by. So, yes, Jerry.
Yeah, I don't know how familiar you are with the editorial staff there, but what could we do to support them? So I know there's a few cartoonists here. Should we contact them to send material, or what can we do to support Charlie Hebdo now?
they were actually very uncomfortable with the outpouring of support because great many people that they feel do not understand any of what they're trying to do suddenly rushed and wanted to be seen as in solidarity with Charlie Hebdo. So all of the politicians that they've been mocking, Netanyahu even came over and marched, so there were, they were kind of overwhelmed. Incredible amounts of money poured in that they had not requested, and they sort of felt that actually we just want to go back to work and do our thing. We're a minority. We're a minority voice, and that's normal to us. So I think probably their response would be continuing to do things like Oasis is doing here is what they would be very much in favor of. But at this point, I don't know that they need, legally and financially, they're in good shape these days. I think there's two in the back, and then we'll move up front. Yeah.
Which one?
I'll let you choose.
I'm probably one of the oldest people in the room. Been around a while. Well, close at least. I turned 80 last November. I spent some time in Korea wearing a uniform. Mm-hmm. And at a point in my life, I developed an attitude of you're either part of the solution or part of the problem. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go stand over here and let you people take care of whatever's over there, and I'm not part of that. Mm-hmm. We all breathe the same air. If you pollute the air in China, it gets to my ozone and I pay part of the problem. Yeah. I run into people who are Muslim. The people next door to me where I live have a garage and they're Muslim, a couple down the road, and they're fairly moderate. Mm-hmm. And my question becomes, not to everybody else, but to me, why it is that somebody jumps up and does something that creates a problem like this, yet when there was this thing in the newspaper a year or so ago where these young girls coming out of an English school were machine gunned because they were teaching them English, and besides they didn't have the proper covering on their face and so forth. And so they just simply shot them. These are teenage girls, 11, 12, 13. I can't think of any religion that could give that people the right to do that. There's so much out there that the radical, quote, side of Muslim does. And they rise up and scream and holler if we do anything, but I don't hear any cry or hue and cry from the Muslim community when they do it. I'd like to know why.
I would suggest that that's not entirely accurate. I think for the French Muslims, for instance, I would say were absolutely unanimous unanimous might be stretching it, but let's say 90% absolutely condemned these attacks against Charlie Hebdo. And for them, this destroys their community. This destroys their possibility of integrating into France. They know that this impacts all of their lives, but I don't think it's just out of self-interest that they're condemning it. I think that this absolutely clashes with their views. I think it would be maybe a little bit like Christians in the United States when one of these people would assassinate a doctor at Planned Parenthood. I think there are a great many Christians who absolutely condemn this act, and I think for the Muslims it's a similar case. The one other thing I would add is we don't have to go back too many centuries for Christian religions to be burning people at the stake or killing people for their ideas. And I think we have kind of an expectation that somehow Islam is supposed to be on the Western clock. Our civilization reached a certain point where we've decided we're not going to burn witches anymore, and therefore every other civilization should suddenly kick in on the same clock as us. And I think it's more complicated than that. These cultures have their own kind of internal evolution. So I certainly don't defend Islam's extremism, but I think that we're really projecting a Western expectation of where their culture needs to go that we didn't have to answer to in our long progression. So I'm not excusing, but I'm attempting to explain, if you see the distinction. Yeah.
So there's more response from the Muslim community outside the United States?
Absolutely.
So my newspaper and so forth, what I get doesn't tell it.
Well, for starters, not many of these people are in a position to have access to Western media to express these things. It's a little bit like protests in the street. We only notice it when they become violent because these are populations that are cut off from mainstream media also.
Thank you. I'll do more research.
Okay. And I think we understood each other. Yeah, there was
to what extent do you see the U.S. media response to this incident indicative of nationwide intimidation by Islam? I didn't see any of this in my local newspapers or national newspaper.
I think my initial response was really what was indicative of, to me overall, was just a really pretty catastrophic level of cultural knowledge about anything outside of the United States. I think my first response was a lot of the media today just simply do not know anything at all about the complexity of what Muslim communities are around the world, or even, frankly, do not know much about Europe these days either. I think we've really paid for the changes that have happened in the media. I think naively, because they don't understand Islam, they basically think it's their version of Christianity. And so when they tiptoe around it, I think they're tiptoeing around it as they would if they were worried about offending Christian constituents. By doing so, I think they give it a dignity that it did not have. These terrorists, these are punks. These are not in fact fundamentalists who have been in religious schools for 20 or 30 years. These were drug dealers. These were people with prison records. These are people whose contact with Islam came while they were in prison. They were radicalized in prison, but after they got out of prison, they were still leading a life that is completely incompatible with the beliefs that they pretend to be defending. Typically it's described as what happens when the youth leave one culture and break with the values that they came from, but they fail to integrate into the new culture, and so they're in sort of a free fall between two different cultures, and they end up putting a totally incoherent mishmash of the two different cultures. They borrow a few things from Islam, they borrow a few things from Western culture, and it's this completely incoherent mix. So to me, the response of this happened because you offended Islam, no. To me, that dignifies, that acts as if somehow there was something pure and dedicated in this terrorist attack, that these were idealists, for instance. They weren't idealists, they're punks. I don't know if that, so they basically took, I think, the dignity that they grant Christian faith in the United States and sort of draped that over these terrorists without understanding who they were and even what their position really was with respect to Islam. Yes.
We're going to go to Patrick.
We'll make it back around.
Just building on the question earlier about why there aren't, moderate Muslims jumping up and down in front of cameras asking or protesting this sort of action. It seems to me that part of the problem is that the media culture has this mentality, if it bleeds, it leads. So you don't see them searching out those moderate voices to condemn this sort of stuff. And I was wondering, what in your mind can be done to sort of change that and actually get to the seek out those people that would otherwise, condemn this?
I think certainly something like Al Jazeera being available in English now, the growth of blogs, the number of people that are in exile from these communities who are writing in English or writing in French, writing in European languages. I think that is certainly helping. The other thing we can ask, though, is it's one thing to hope that there would be some response from that community. There's another thing, though. Are they all, in fact, somehow supposed to stand up and justify themselves when two idiots from who claim to be representing that religion commit an act like this? When Timothy McVeigh bombs the federal building in Oklahoma City, I think we all condemn it, but I don't think the entire white population of the United States feels like they have to stand up and explain that we would never do that. We're not like that other white person. And I think that this is where the Muslim community, what it means to be Muslim is so different depending on the country that you're coming from, and the hundreds of millions of people that we're talking about. There is something sort of absurd in the idea that every single one of them is supposed to stand up and somehow clarify that they're not, standing by this person. So I understand the desire to have clarity for that, because a lot of us in the West, we don't understand what these different communities are. It is incredibly complicated, and this is very new for us, and culturally it is creating lots of difficulties. So I understand our desire to kind of be reassured, but I think if we look at it from their perspective, there's also something very insulting to say, so not all 100 million of you are murderous maniacs. So it's I think a difficult question on how to juggle that.
We've got this one and one more, and that's it.
Okay. And I think the gentleman in the red shirt, I missed him very early, but we'll figure it out.
I was just curious, what are ways that, besides just kind of, because it's just generally what you've said so far is to blanket the situation is just be more tolerant, but what are ways for us in America to be more media conscious to these situations, because with so many different voices, what can we actually do to make it better for us to understand different cultures?
I think certainly there are a lot of major newspapers now that in foreign countries that do have English language editions, and I think making a regular habit of reading the same story in an American paper and reading that same subject covered in a foreign paper can be extremely useful. And I think steps in that direction to not have your only source of information be within our fairly kind of hermetically sealed American culture. To take France, 50% of the books on the shelves in any French bookstore are translations from other cultures. In the United States, 3% of the books on shelves are translations. So 97%, are homegrown, and I think that imbalance is where we end up not, having more information.
You touched on this a little bit before, but I was wondering, between living in Texas and having this deep understanding of European fundamentalism, what similarities and differences, what parallels do you draw between America's brand of Christian fundamentalism and European dealing with Islamic fundamentalism?
I like that the same word is used for both, for starters. And I think if I read one more person in American office say we should just shoot them all dead, I'm going to freak out. I'm not sure that we are as far away from that as we would like to. You may all have seen the assistant prosecutor in Milwaukee, maybe, who had to step down because this person tweeted in response to the protesters in Baltimore, "Shoot them all, shoot them dead." This is somebody in the prosecutor's office. This is somebody who is in a position of administering justice, and this was their response. This isn't, Bob at the counter in a bar. So, to me, I'm afraid that that person isn't going to go out and do it, but that already suggests that they would not necessarily react that strongly if somebody did do it. There's already kind of a tacit acceptance that this would be an acceptable response. And I see this response of if there's a problem, shoot it. I think we see this pretty widespread these days, and that's a very disturbing thing for me to see.
Okay, let's thank Ralph for a great presentation.